Yes, Vivian. Now, we've been talking about the humanitarian ramifications and the political hurdles and the loss of life in Gaza and Israel, but the conflict has had far-reaching effects. And this time, this particular story, we're talking culture. A well-known theatre in London, the Tricycle Theatre, has decided it will no longer host the UK Jewish Film Festival after events in Gaza during the past few weeks. The theatre has hosted the festival for the past 8 years, but it said it did not want to be associated with events that had funding from the Israeli embassy in London because obviously of its links to the Israeli government. This was the comment from Indo Urban Singham, the artistic director of the Tricycle. We had asked the Tricycle Theatre if they would do an interview with us, but they have declined. We have Sunny Hundal, a journalist, blogger and academic, and Hannah Weisfeld, a director of Yachad, Jewish organization representing pro-peace Jews and supporting a two-state solution. Welcome to both of you to the program.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Sunny, let's start with you. Tell us what you made of this boycott.
Well, I think that the Tricycle were within their rights. They argued that, that in this current conflict, taking money from, hosting a film festival which took money from the Israeli embassy meant that they were taking sides in the conflict. So they said to the film festival that we will find other ways to do this, or we'll match your funding and replace the funding from the Israeli embassy instead. But we still want to host the film festival. But the film festival declined, and so I think that the Tricycle were within their remit to say that they felt uncomfortable hosting a film festival which took money from the Israeli embassy because that meant they were taking sides.
So you do support the boycott?
Yes.
Hannah?
I think it puts the UK Jewish Film Festival in a really awkward position, and actually an impossible one, because the reality is that Israel is a diverse, complex society like all societies. There is not a homogenous opinion within that society about anything. And I think that actually asking a UK Jewish cultural festival to cut their ties with the only Jewish state in the world and not take their funding for a film festival, we're not talking about arms sales, and we're not having the conversation about whether the British government is selling or the Spanish government is selling arms to Israel. This is a conversation about whether whether the Israeli embassy can fund a cultural film festival.
It's true. However, the Israeli embassy, of course, is the representative of the Israeli government here, and the Israeli government is now engaged in a conflict with Gaza, a conflict, like I said, that has had a very, very dear humanitarian cost in Gaza.
That I agree with. Listen, I represent an organisation that has built support within the Anglo-Jewish community over the past 4 weeks for a ceasefire for that conflict. We've had thousands of British Jews stand up and say, I want to see an end to this round of conflict and I want to see an urgent return to negotiations. However, what this decision has done is made a lot of people who have supported that ceasefire call feel very uncomfortable about the fact that they can't walk into a cinema and celebrate Jewish culture because of that funding situation.
And Sunny, what about this point that this festival is essentially a cultural event? It's apolitical, and also it is a platform for Jewish artists to express themselves, and in more often than not, they express themselves by criticizing some of the practices of the Israeli government, and essentially Tricycle has prevented them from doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that I totally agree with. And the Tricycle said repeatedly that they wanted to host a film festival, and they were, they fully accepted that it was frequently critical. But the thing is, if you are taking money from the Israeli government, then I'm sorry, but in this current conflict, and we are right now still in the middle of a conflict where one side is being accused of war crimes by Human Rights Watch, then if you're taking money from that side, that is taking a side. There's no getting away from that. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, if this was going on when it came to Sri Lanka, and there have been controversies in the UK with regards to the Sri Lankan government, then people would also raise an outcry. They would say, why are you taking money from the Sri Lankan government?
Hannah, what do you make of this point that the context of this overshadows the actual festival and the arts that the festival introduces?
Well, I think this becomes a discussion then about whether you support cultural boycott. And, what the Jewish Film Festival has done, and what a lot of culture inside Israel does, is open up and build bridges and find a space in which to critique things that go on. We've sponsored 2 films over the past 2 years at the film festival, one called The Gatekeepers and one called The Law in These Parts, both of which are incredibly critical of the current Israeli government and previous governments, both of which have received funding in various ways and means from Israeli government institutions, both of which have had packed audiences in that film festival, complete sellouts. There is a reality today that if you turn around to the Jewish community in the UK and say the Israeli government, the Jewish state is not allowed to be involved in diaspora Jewish life from a cultural perspective, what you're going to do is shut down the debate inside the community. It makes people feel incredibly uncomfortable. I live down the road, literally down the road from the tricycle, and it's a place that I visit frequently, and it makes people feel uncomfortable. It makes people feel that actually the conversation is not what Sunny is saying, is not, and people have a right to be critical. People have a right to have that debate and to protest and all of those things. I don't accept the accusation at all that it's an anti-Semitic decision. I think that's a foolish accusation. What it has done to the community, though, is make them sort of get in the bunker, make them feel incredibly uncomfortable about the fact that somebody else is telling them how they can and can't celebrate Jewish culture. And I don't think that in the democracy in which we live, A, it's particularly helpful, and B, with the levels of...
Do you think a decision could have been made, though, to allow this to happen, that maybe the Jewish Film Festival could have accepted the offer and taken another way of funding?
I don't think any Jewish cultural institution in this country is going to be able to respond to the dilemma in which they were put. And ultimately, it was a form of ultimatum. And, there are many, many Jewish organisations here that receive funding one way or another for Jewish education in this country, for Jewish culture in this country from Israel. Asking those organisations to stop receiving that funding is a statement that they're never going to be prepared to make.
Sonny, just briefly from you, what do you make of this point then? Then boycotting events like this prevents a dialogue from happening where the two sides should engage.
Yeah, I completely agree that two sides should engage, but I don't think it's, I don't think it's impossible to pretend. I don't think it's possible to pretend that in the current climate that we are going to go through a period of tension, and that there have to be other ways, perhaps, to open up the dialogue and have a discussion, because that is important. But I think, the fact of the matter is that people are conflating Israel, which to me is a political state, as a government, with sort of the Jewish state and the sole representative of Jews. And I think that if we start making that conflation, then there is a danger that you sort of make this about religion. Whereas to me, the conflict over there right now is political, and I see it in political terms. For example, Israel has loads of Arab Muslim citizens too. So, let's not just make it about religion, because if we end up down that road, then the Israel-Palestine conflict then becomes a Jewish-Muslim conflict, and that's a dangerous road to go down into. And what's frustrating about this is that, everyone's pushing towards that, when that shouldn't be the way to look at the conflict.
Very briefly, Hannah.
Sunny, you're right, it's a political conflict, but we're also in a situation where the last polling of the Jewish community said that 82% of British Jews feel that Israel is a central part to their Jewish identity. That doesn't mean that politics is necessarily central, but the country and the Jewish state is central.
Sure, but we have to separate the two, though, no?
Yeah, but what you're doing is determining how Jews can and can't identify as Jewish. We can't separate that. There is a reality that most Jews in this country feel that Israel is an essential part of their identity for many different reasons. Not allowing that country to be part of Jewish culture in this country is basically saying to the Jewish community, you're not entitled to celebrate your Jewish identity the way you want to.
Hannah and Sonny, I'll have to leave it there. I know we could talk about this all day. Thank you so much for joining me. Sonny Hundal, a journalist, blogger and academic, and Hannah Weisfeld, director of Yachad, a Jewish organization representing pro-peace Jews and supporting a two-state solution. Many thanks for joining us.
Well, actually, we are going to